The Tudor dynasty was built on power, fear, and the constant anxiety of succession. Henry VIII, one of England's most notorious kings, was obsessed with ensuring that his bloodline would not only continue but flourish. To achieve this, he married multiple wives, executed those who disappointed him, and bent the church itself to his will. But behind the royal splendor and the glittering halls of Hampton Court lay a story of fragility. Henry's desperate need for a son shaped his reign, and when he finally secured a male heir, he poured every ounce of hope into the boy's future. That boy was Edward VI, the spoiled prince who lived in unimaginable luxury, yet met an end so chilling it seemed to mock the very power of the crown. His life was a paradox, nurtured in privilege, yet betrayed by frailty, celebrated as the savior of a dynasty, yet destroyed by forces no crown could withstand. From the moment of his birth in 1537, Edward was treated not just as a child, but as a miracle. His mother, Jane Seymour, was Henry VIII's third wife, and the only one who delivered the longed-for son. Jane's death shortly after his birth only heightened the sense of destiny around him, as if her sacrifice sanctified his life. The boy became the center of the Tudor universe. He was given tutors of the highest caliber, clothing made from the finest silks, and a household that operated with military precision to keep him safe. Every cough, every fever, every stumble was recorded with obsessive detail, for he was the vessel of England's future. Henry himself paraded Edward as proof of divine favor, showing off his son as though the boy's existence erased years of disappointment and turmoil. Edward's childhood was one of excess and control. His every need was met, but his every action was also scrutinized. Courtiers showered him with gifts, from miniature suits of armor to rare books bound in gold. He was shielded from harshness, surrounded by flattering servants and doting nobles eager to curry favor with the king by pleasing the prince. He learned quickly that his word carried weight, even as a boy, and the sense of entitlement began to shape him. Yet behind the pampering lay a darker truth. Edward was sickly. He suffered from recurring fevers, coughing fits, and a body that never seemed as strong as his royal father's hopes demanded. No matter how carefully he was tended, no matter how much luxury surrounded him, Edward could not escape the fact that he was fragile. When Henry VIII died in 1547, Edward ascended the throne at the tender age of 9. The boy who had been spoiled and sheltered was suddenly declared king of one of Europe's most powerful nations. Of course, he was far too young to rule in his own right. A council of regents, dominated by ambitious nobles, took control, ruling in his name while manipulating his image as a godly young monarch. Edward was paraded before the people as a boy king chosen by Providence, a new Josiah, destined to lead a Protestant Reformation. Behind the scenes, his protectors used his royal authority to advance their own power, making decisions that Edward was too young to fully understand. Yet Edward, even at that age, showed signs of arrogance. He had been told since birth that he was special, and he believed it. He saw himself as chosen, ordained, and when his voice was sought in matters of religion, he demanded stricter, harsher reforms. The court around him was a nest of vipers. His uncles, the Seymours, vied for power against other nobles. Factions plotted in shadowed corridors, each one eager to control the boy king for their own ends. Edward grew up in an atmosphere of intrigue and danger, even as he lived in luxury. His education emphasized not only theology and languages, but also the divine right of kings. He was taught to believe that he was the very instrument of God's will. This belief, combined with his sense of privilege, gave him a cold streak that unsettled even those closest to him. When his older sister Mary resisted his Protestant policies, he spoke of her with cruelty, showing none of the compassion one might expect from a brother. It was as though the boy who had been coddled and protected had developed a hardness born not of experience, but of entitlement. But despite the image of power, Edward's body was betraying him. He grew thinner, paler, and weaker as the years passed. Courtiers whispered about his health, though none dared speak openly of his decline. His cough deepened, racking his frame, and fevers left him drained. Some days he could hardly rise from his bed, Physicians tried remedies of the time, bleeding, herbs, and concoctions that did little more than hasten his suffering. The irony was bitter. The boy who was the hope of a dynasty, raised in indulgence, could not escape the simple reality of mortality. All the power, wealth, and divine proclamations in the world could not save him from the disease that consumed him. By 1553, Edward was little more than a shadow of the golden child once shown off by Henry VIII. He was only 15, yet he looked far older, ravaged by illness. His once bright eyes grew hollow, his voice strained and weak. Still, he clung to his role as king, insisting on signing documents and trying to shape the succession. Obsessed with preventing his Catholic sister Mary from taking the throne, Edward backed a desperate plot to name Lady Jane Grey as his heir. Even as his body failed, his mind remained fixated on control and the preservation of the Protestant cause. But fate was indifferent to his schemes. Edward's final days were marked by agony. His coughing grew so violent that those around him could hear him struggling for breath from outside his chambers. Blood stained his linens, and the smell of sickness filled the air. The once spoiled prince, who had lived surrounded by wealth, was reduced to a boy gasping in torment. Those who witnessed it described a slow, chilling death, one that dragged on for weeks, stripping him of dignity. There was no comfort, no miracle, no salvation. The Tudor dynasty's miracle child died at 15, his body broken, his dreams unfinished, his legacy overshadowed by the chaos his death unleashed. The kingdom trembled as news of his death spread. His plan to make Lady Jane Grey queen lasted only 9 days before Mary Tudor seized the throne, plunging England back into religious turmoil. Edward, for all the hopes pinned upon him, left little behind but the memory of a spoiled boy whose frailty betrayed him. His death was more than just the end of a young life. It was a reminder that even kings are powerless against the most human of enemies. History remembers him not for triumphs or victories, but for the tragedy of promise unfulfilled. Edward VI's story is one of contrast, the luxury of a prince against the mercilessness of disease, the arrogance of entitlement against the fragility of the human body. He was raised as if he were untouchable, yet he died in a way that stripped him of every illusion. His chilling end serves as a haunting footnote in the Tudor saga, a dynasty built on power and blood, but constantly haunted by the frailty of those meant to sustain it. Edward's short life was marked by contradiction, and to understand his story more deeply, we have to look at how the world around him shaped his final months. While he was only a boy, he carried the burden of being the linchpin of England's future. Everyone around him projected their hopes and fears onto his fragile body. The Protestants believed he would solidify their reforms and protect them from a Catholic resurgence. His tutors praised his intellect, emphasizing how precociously he could write in Latin and debate theology. But what few admitted openly was that no amount of brilliance or faith could sustain a body that was wasting away. Edward was essentially a vessel into which the kingdom poured its ambitions, and that vessel was cracking. During his illness, Edward became increasingly isolated. The court was a place of whispered conversations and false reassurances. Few dared to tell him the true severity of his condition, though he was intelligent enough to sense it. He wrote in his journal of his sickness with a detached tone, almost as if recording another's fate. Yet he also displayed moments of grim acceptance. He seemed to understand that death was approaching, and his obsession with the succession revealed his desperate desire to exert control over something, anything, before he was gone. It was tragic, because he never had the chance to be a child, let alone a man. His life was defined by the crown and ended in its service. Those final weeks were also defined by a cruel irony. Edward had been shielded from suffering his entire life, coddled by servants, and sheltered by wealth, yet death forced him to endure agonies that no luxury could soften. Accounts from courtiers describe his skin turning ashen, his limbs wasting to bone, his chest rattling with each shallow breath. His coughing fits were so violent that his ribs ached and his body convulsed. Some believed he had tuberculosis. Others suspected a combination of infections and malnutrition that weakened his resistance. Whatever the cause, his suffering was undeniable. The boy who had once been paraded in golden garments now lay shivering, his royal silks soaked in sweat. And yet, despite the cruelty of his condition, Edward's mind remained active. He dictated letters, consulted with advisors, and insisted that his will for the succession be honored. He fixated on his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, not because of personal affection, but because she was a Protestant pawn in the larger battle for England's soul. His decision to exclude Mary and Elizabeth from the line of succession was both political and deeply personal. To him, Catholicism was not just a different faith, it was a threat to everything he believed God had intended for his reign. Even in his weakness, he clung to the notion that he was chosen, ordained to shape the kingdom, even if that meant leaving behind a plan that would plunge England into turmoil. The boy king's sense of entitlement never left him. This too was part of the tragedy. While his body withered, his belief in his own importance burned stronger. It was as if the fragility of his life fueled an even more desperate conviction that his decisions mattered. In his writings and speeches, he often spoke with a tone of righteousness, insisting on the purity of his faith and the divine nature of his rule. But beneath that, there was an unmistakable loneliness. Spoiled though he had been, indulged though his every whim was, Edward never truly experienced love in the way an ordinary boy might. His mother died giving him life. His father loved him fiercely, but with a possessive pride more than tender affection. And his sisters, bound by politics and religion, were more rivals than siblings. In the end, Edward was a boy who had everything yet nothing at all. When he finally succumbed to death in July 1553, it was not the triumphant departure of a king, but the agonizing passing of a child. Witnesses described the drawn-out horror of his final hours, his body racked with spasms, his lips stained with blood, his breaths shallow and ragged until at last silence claimed him. The people of England mourned him publicly, but privately many felt the gnawing fear of uncertainty. The Tudor dynasty's male hope was gone, and with him, the stability that Henry VIII had fought so ruthlessly to secure. His death set off a chain of events that revealed just how fragile the Tudor legacy truly was. Lady Jane Grey's brief reign lasted only 9 days before Mary Tudor seized power. The Protestant reforms Edward had pushed so fervently began to unravel under Mary's Catholic rule. The boy who had been hailed as the savior of England became a ghost, overshadowed by the blood and fire of Mary's reign. History largely remembers Edward not as a great monarch, but as a footnote, a spoiled prince, whose frailty betrayed the hopes of a dynasty. And yet, there is something haunting in his story. Edward VI represents the inescapable truth that power, wealth, and privilege cannot protect us from the vulnerabilities of the human body. His short life encapsulates the paradox of monarchy, exalted as divine yet bound by mortality. He lived surrounded by riches, but never tasted freedom. He wore a crown, but never truly ruled. He was praised as England's future, yet died before he could secure it. In the end, Edward's story is a reminder that even kings, spoiled by fortune and history, remain human. The chilling image of Edward's wasted body, gasping for breath in the shadow of a throne, lingers as a symbol of how fleeting power can be. His reign may have been brief, his accomplishments few, but his death reveals a deeper narrative. The fragility of dynasties built on fragile bodies, the futility of human ambition against the inevitability of nature, and the haunting silence left when a crown outlives its wearer. If you've been captivated by Edward's tragic journey, his rise as the spoiled son of Henry VIII, and his chilling fall into an early death, then don't stop here. There are countless hidden stories in history that reveal the raw humanity behind kings, queens, and empires. So make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next deep dive into the past. Share this story with friends who love history, and let's keep uncovering the forgotten lives that shaped our world in ways we rarely see. History isn't just about dates and battles, it's about people, fragile and flawed, just like Edward VI, who remind us of how thin the line is between power and tragedy.